Your teachers lied to you, your textbooks lied to you, and the history you memorized for every single exam was packed with myths, propaganda, and flat-out nonsense that somehow survived for centuries. Columbus never touched North America, Einstein never failed math, and Walt Disney is definitely not frozen in a vault somewhere waiting to come back to life. Everything you thought you knew is about to get completely demolished in the next few minutes. Stick around because by the end of this video, your entire childhood education is going to feel like one giant group project where nobody did the research. 1. Columbus discovered America, and for years, schools served this story like it was gospel truth carved in stone. Christopher Columbus, the man celebrated with his own federal holiday, would never once stepped foot on North American soil during any of his 4 voyages. He landed in the Caribbean, wandered around Central and South America, and somehow still got the credit for an entire continent full of people who were already living there. The Vikings arrived in North America nearly 5 centuries before Columbus even owned a boat. Leif Erikson set up camp in Newfoundland around 1000 AD. Columbus did not discover America, he just had better marketing. 2. You only use 10% of your brain. And apparently the people who created school curriculums were proving that point themselves. This myth got repeated so confidently that entire self-help industries were built around unlocking the other 90%. Brain scans completely destroyed this idea because they show that virtually all regions of the brain are active at some point during the day. And even while a person is completely unconscious and asleep, significant brain activity continues firing away. There is no dormant 90% sitting there waiting to be unlocked. The human brain consumes about 20% of the body's total energy, despite being only 2% of its weight. Every part gets used. 3. The Great Wall of China is visible from space, and schools repeated this fact with the same confidence they used for everything else that turned out to be completely wrong. Astronauts have actually addressed this directly and confirmed that the wall is simply too narrow to see from low Earth orbit with the naked eye. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei specifically went to space in 2003 hoping to spot it and saw absolutely nothing. The wall averages about 30 feet wide, which from space is basically invisible. You have a better chance of spotting a garden hose from a helicopter at night than seeing that wall from orbit. 4. Swallowed gum stays in your stomach for 7 years, and every parent on the planet deployed this myth like a weapon to stop kids from swallowing it. The truth is that while your body cannot digest the gum base itself, it does not just set up permanent residence in your stomach either. Your digestive system moves it through exactly the same way it handles other indigestible materials, and it exits the body within a few days like everything else. The only way gum becomes a real stomach problem is if someone swallows enormous quantities of it repeatedly, which is a completely different level of commitment to poor decision-making. 5. Lightning never strikes the same place twice, and this might be the most confidently wrong thing ever casually repeated in American classrooms. The Empire State Building alone gets struck by lightning between 20 and 25 times every single year. It actually has a rod specifically designed to attract lightning strikes because the building gets hit so frequently and predictably. Lightning absolutely loves tall objects and will return to the same spot repeatedly during a single storm without any hesitation whatsoever. The idea that lightning has some kind of personal policy about repeat visits to the same location is genuinely one of the most ridiculous things that ever got treated as common sense. 6. Diamonds are made from coal, and this romantic little geology lesson got repeated so many times that jewelry commercials practically built their entire identity around it. Diamonds actually form from pure carbon located about 100 miles below the Earth's surface under extreme heat and pressure, and most of them are far older than any coal deposit that has ever existed on this planet. Coal comes from decomposed plant material and only exists relatively close to the surface. The carbon that forms diamonds has been sitting deep in the Earth's mantle since before plants even evolved. Coal and diamonds are not related. They are not cousins. They are not even in the same geological neighborhood. 7. Napoleon Bonaparte was extremely short, and this is one of the most successful character assassination campaigns in all of recorded history. Napoleon stood at around 5 feet 6 or 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was completely average for a Frenchman during the late 1700s. So the confusion came partly from a difference between French and English measurement units, and partly from relentless British propaganda that deliberately portrayed him as a tiny little man to mock and undermine him. British political cartoonists went absolutely feral, drawing him as a miniature tyrant, and the image just stuck permanently. Napoleon was not short. He was just absolutely surrounded by enemies with printing presses and an agenda. 8. Humans only have 5 senses, and this is the kind of oversimplification that sounds clean and organized until scientists show up and ruin everything with actual research. The traditional 5 of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch were proposed by Aristotle over 2,000 years ago, when somehow that ancient Greek checklist made it all the way into modern American classrooms without a single update. Scientists now recognize somewhere between 21 and 33 distinct human senses, depending on how you categorize them, including proprioception, which tells your body where its own limbs are located, thermoception, which detects temperature, and interoception, which monitors what is happening inside your own body. Aristotle was brilliant, but he missed a few things. 9. Humans evolved from chimpanzees, and this misunderstanding has been causing arguments at dinner tables across America for decades. The actual scientific position is that humans and chimpanzees share a common ancestor that lived roughly 6 to 8 million years ago, and both species evolved separately from that shared starting point, going in completely different directions over millions of years. Nobody climbed down from a tree and immediately became a person. Chimps did not become humans, and humans did not come from chimps. The two species are more like extremely distant cousins who both inherited certain traits from the same ancient relative. Saying humans evolved from chimps is like saying you were born from your own cousin. 10. The tongue has separate taste zones for sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And generations of American students drew that little divided tongue diagram in science class like it was established fact handed down from the universe itself. That map was based on a massively misinterpreted German study from 1901, and the error just kept getting copied into textbooks for over a century without anyone bothering to actually test it again. The entire tongue detects all tastes simultaneously, and there are no dedicated zones assigned to anything. Every taste receptor is distributed across the whole surface. The diagram was wrong, the textbooks were wrong, and the teacher who made you memorize it was working with outdated information from before both world wars. 11. George Washington had wooden teeth, and this is one of those myths that got so deeply embedded into American culture that it basically became part of the man's official personality. Washington did suffer terribly from tooth loss throughout his life, and wore multiple sets of dentures. But none of them were ever made from wood at any point. His dentures were actually constructed from a genuinely disturbing combination of ivory, from elephants and walruses, animal bones, and teeth pulled from other human beings, including possibly some from enslaved people at his plantation. The wooden teeth story is somehow less horrifying than the real answer, which is probably why the wooden version became the one everybody remembered and repeated forever. 12. Blood inside your body is blue until it hits oxygen. And this myth spread so effectively that millions of Americans spent years genuinely believing their veins were carrying around blue liquid like some kind of internal ocean. Your blood is red. It has always been red. And it will never be blue under any biological circumstance involving a living human body. So the confusion comes from looking at veins through skin, where they appear bluish or greenish because of the way different wavelengths of light penetrate tissue and reflect back to your eyes. The blood itself inside those veins is still dark red the entire time. There is no moment of dramatic color transformation happening anywhere inside your body ever. 13. Albert Einstein failed math, and this myth became the official comfort story for every student who ever bombed a test and needed something to hold on to emotionally. Einstein never failed math at any point in his academic life, and the story is a complete fabrication built on a misunderstanding of the Swiss grading system where high scores and low scores are assigned opposite numbers compared to the American system. He had mastered calculus before he turned 15 years old. Why he was so far ahead in mathematics and physics that his teachers reportedly found him disruptive because he already understood material beyond what was being taught. Einstein was not a late bloomer. He was just a genius in a system that did not always know what to do with him. 14. Seasons are caused by Earth getting closer to or farther from the sun. And this explanation sounds so logical and satisfying that it slipped into classrooms and stayed there without much resistance. The actual cause is the tilt of Earth's axis at approximately 23.5 degrees, which determines how directly sunlight hits different parts of the planet at different times of year. The distance explanation completely falls apart when you realize that Earth is actually closest to the sun in January, which is the middle of winter for everyone in the northern hemisphere. If distance caused seasons, then the entire planet would experience summer and winter simultaneously, and that is clearly not what happens when Australia is having Christmas on the beach. 15. Humans have exactly 206 bones, and while that number is technically accurate for most adults, it leaves out the genuinely fascinating part of the story that schools never bothered to explain fully. Babies are born with approximately 270 separate bones, and over the course of childhood and adolescence, many of those bones gradually fuse together until the adult skeleton reaches its final count somewhere in a person's mid-20s. Some adults end up with slightly more or fewer than 206, depending on natural variations like extra ribs or additional small bones in the feet. The human skeleton is essentially spending the first 2 decades of your life doing a slow-motion consolidation project nobody told you about. 16. The Pilgrims wore all black outfits with those tall hats and little buckle accents, and this iconic image gets plastered across every Thanksgiving decoration in America every single year with complete confidence. That entire outfit was invented by artists and illustrators during the 19th century who were drawing historical scenes without doing any actual historical research. Real pilgrims wore clothing in earthy tones like brown, green, salt, and dark red because those were the practical and affordable colors available to working people in the early 1600s. The dramatic black and white buckle aesthetic was a romanticized artistic invention that got repeated so many times it eventually replaced reality entirely. Every Thanksgiving turkey decoration is basically wearing a costume from a fake history play. 17. Goldfish only have a 3-second memory, and this myth became the go-to insult for forgetfulness so quickly that it practically entered the official English language as an established biological fact. Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated through controlled experiments that goldfish can actually remember things for months at a time and can be trained to navigate mazes, recognize feeding signals, and respond to specific cues consistently over extended periods. A study from Australia trained goldfish to press a lever for food, and the fish remembered the task clearly after months had passed. The 3-second memory idea has no scientific basis whatsoever, and goldfish everywhere have been silently remembering this insult for far longer than anyone gave them credit for. 18. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, and this credit has been sitting comfortably in American history books for well over a century despite being a pretty significant oversimplification of what actually happened. Humphrey Davy demonstrated electric light as early as 1802, and at least 20 other inventors had created working incandescent bulbs before Edison entered the picture. What Edison actually did was develop a more practical and commercially viable version of an existing concept, improve the filament design, and build the electrical infrastructure needed to deliver power to homes and businesses at scale. That is genuinely impressive and worth celebrating on its own merits. But it is a very different thing from inventing something from nothing, which is the version that ended up in every textbook. 19. Toilets flush in opposite directions in the northern and southern hemispheres because of the Coriolis effect. And this one got taught with such scientific confidence that it felt like settled physics. The Coriolis effect is real, and it absolutely influences large-scale systems like hurricanes and ocean currents, but a toilet bowl is so small that the effect is essentially undetectable at that scale. The direction water spins when you flush is almost entirely determined by the design of the bowl and the angle of the water jets built into the fixture itself. Researchers have demonstrated this by building specially designed bowls with perfectly neutral water entry and measuring the results under controlled conditions. Your toilet has no idea what hemisphere it lives in. 20. The American Revolution was fought because colonists were angry about a tea tax, and this tidy little explanation made its way into elementary school lessons and somehow never got a serious upgrade. The tea tax was certainly a visible flashpoint, and the Boston Tea Party made for a dramatic story. But the underlying cause was a much larger and more serious argument about the fundamental question of whether a government 3,000 miles away had the right to tax people who had absolutely no elected representatives in that government. The phrase, "no taxation without representation," was not about tea specifically. It was a constitutional argument about political legitimacy and self-governance that had been building for years before anyone dumped a single crate into Boston Harbor. 21. Dogs only see in black and white. And this myth got repeated so casually in American classrooms that generations of dog owners spent years feeling genuinely sorry for their pets while watching colorful sunsets together. Dogs do not see the full spectrum of colors that humans do, but they absolutely see color, and their world is not a sad grayscale film from the 1930s. Their vision is similar to a human who has red-green color blindness, meaning they perceive the world primarily in shades of blue, yellow, and gray. They can distinguish between a blue ball and a yellow ball without any trouble at all. The black and white story was never based on any scientific study and just got repeated until everyone accepted it as obvious fact. 22. Drinking milk builds strong bones and prevents fractures, and the American dairy industry spent decades funding school nutrition programs, designing food pyramids, and plastering celebrity milk mustache advertisements everywhere to make sure this message reached every single child in the country. Not the actual research tells a genuinely uncomfortable story because countries with the highest rates of dairy consumption, including the United States and several Scandinavian nations, consistently show some of the highest rates of hip fractures and osteoporosis in the entire world. Countries where dairy consumption is very low show significantly lower fracture rates. Scientists have pointed out that calcium from plant sources is absorbed effectively by the body, and that other lifestyle factors play enormous roles in bone health that have nothing to do with milk. 23. Sugar makes kids hyperactive, and every parent who ever banned candy at a birthday party or confiscated Halloween hauls was operating on the assumption that this was settled science backed by decades of research. It is not. Multiple carefully controlled double-blind studies have tested this connection repeatedly and found absolutely zero measurable link between sugar consumption and hyperactive behavior in children. In one particularly revealing study, parents were told their children had consumed sugary drinks when they had actually been given sugar-free beverages, and those parents still rated their children as significantly more hyperactive than usual. The hyperactivity parents observe after sugar is almost entirely explained by the exciting social environment where the sugar is being consumed rather than the sugar itself. 24. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth, and this fact gets presented in classrooms with such finality that questioning it feels almost disrespectful to geography itself. The answer depends entirely on how you define tallest, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. Everest wins when measuring elevation above sea level at 29,032 feet. But Mauna Kea in Hawaii is actually taller when measured from its true base on the ocean floor, stretching over 33,000 feet from bottom to peak. Meanwhile, Chimborazo in Ecuador is the mountain whose summit is farthest from the center of the Earth due to the planet's equatorial bulge. Everest is impressive, but it is not the undisputed champion it was always presented as being. 25. Ostriches bury their heads in the sand when they feel threatened or scared. See, and this image became so culturally embedded that it turned into a universal metaphor for avoiding problems that people still use constantly in everyday conversation. Ostriches have never done this, not once, under any observed circumstances in the wild or in captivity. What they actually do when threatened is either run away at speeds up to 45 miles per hour, lie flat against the ground to camouflage themselves, or use their powerful legs to deliver kicks capable of killing a lion. The buried head myth likely started because ostriches dig holes in the ground to tend their eggs and occasionally lower their heads into those holes, which from a distance could look vaguely like burying. 26. Humans lose most of their body heat through their heads. And this claim became the justification for why parents across America insisted their children wear hats in cold weather with an intensity that suggested the hat was the only thing standing between the child and immediate hypothermia. The head does not lose heat at any dramatically higher rate than other parts of the body, and the math simply does not support the claim. Heat escapes proportionally from whatever skin happens to be exposed to the cold air at any given time. The myth likely originated from old military studies where test subjects wore insulated suits but left their heads uncovered, making the head the only available escape route for body heat by design rather than by any special biological property. 27. Carrots improve your eyesight. And this vegetable has been enjoying an unearned reputation as a vision superfood for so long that parents have been using it to convince children to eat their vegetables for generations with completely false advertising. The carrot and eyesight connection was deliberately invented by the British government during World War II as a propaganda campaign designed to hide the fact that the Royal Air Force had developed radar technology that was helping their pilots locate German aircraft in the dark. The British credited their pilots' success to a carrot-heavy diet instead of revealing the radar secret to the enemy. The propaganda worked so well that it outlasted the war by about 80 years and is still being repeated at dinner tables across America tonight. 28. Shaving makes hair grow back thicker, darker, and faster. And this warning got passed down through families and repeated in health classes with the kind of authority that made teenagers genuinely nervous about picking up a razor for the first time. When you shave a hair, you are cutting through the dead portion of the shaft that exists above the skin surface, and that action has absolutely zero effect on the living follicle underneath the skin that actually controls hair growth, thickness, and color. What people perceive as thicker regrowth is simply the blunt edge of the cut hair emerging from the follicle, which feels stubbly and coarse compared to the naturally tapered tip of an uncut hair. Multiple controlled studies have confirmed that shaving changes nothing about actual hair biology whatsoever. 29. The Salem witch trials involved burning accused witches at the stake, and this dramatic image has appeared in Halloween decorations, history documentaries, and casual conversation for so long that correcting it tends to genuinely surprise people. Nobody was burned at the stake in Salem, Massachusetts during the 1692 trials. 19 people were executed by hanging. One man named Giles Corey was pressed to death under heavy stones when he refused to enter a plea, and several others died while imprisoned awaiting trial. Burning at the stake was associated with witch trials in continental Europe, particularly in countries like Germany and Scotland, and that imagery apparently crossed the Atlantic and got permanently attached to the Salem story despite having nothing to do with what actually happened there. 30. Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity by flying a kite in a lightning storm. And this story has been told with such dramatic flair in American classrooms that it essentially became one of the founding myths of scientific curiosity in this country. Electricity was already a known and studied phenomenon long before Franklin went anywhere near a kite. What Franklin was actually investigating in 1752 was the specific electrical nature of lightning itself, which was not yet understood or proven. His experiment was designed to demonstrate that lightning was an electrical discharge rather than something supernatural or divine. He was not stumbling onto electricity for the first time. He was conducting a targeted experiment to prove a specific hypothesis about something scientists were already actively studying and debating. 31. Ancient Egyptians used slaves to build the pyramids. And this version of history got cemented so deeply into popular culture through movies, television, and textbooks that questioning it still feels somehow controversial to people who grew up with the image of whip-cracking overseers and suffering captives hauling enormous stones across the desert. Archaeological excavations conducted over the past few decades have uncovered the actual villages, bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities used by the pyramid workers, and the evidence shows these were paid skilled laborers who received wages, medical care, and were buried with honor near the pyramids when they died. Graffiti found on pyramid stones even shows worker gangs giving themselves team names and boasting about their productivity like ancient construction crews with serious competitive energy. 32. America has always been dominated by exactly two political parties, and this assumption is so baked into modern American political culture that most people genuinely cannot imagine the system ever functioning any other way. For much of the 19th century, the American political landscape looked completely different from what exists today, with third parties playing genuinely dominant and consequential roles in shaping elections and policy. The Whig Party won presidential elections, the Anti-Masonic Party introduced the concept of nominating conventions that both major parties still use today, and the Republican Party itself began as a third party in 1854, before rapidly rising to win the presidency just 6 years later. The two-party stranglehold on American politics is a relatively recent development presented as an ancient, unchangeable tradition. 33. Chameleons change color to blend into their surroundings as camouflage, and this explanation feels so intuitively correct that it became the default understanding of chameleon biology in classrooms and nature documentaries for decades. The reality is significantly more interesting, and also makes the camouflage story look pretty embarrassing by comparison. Chameleons primarily change color to communicate with other chameleons, expressing emotions like excitement, aggression, stress, and romantic interest through rapid color shifts that function essentially like a full-body mood display system. Their color change is also used to regulate body temperature by absorbing or reflecting sunlight. When chameleons do use color for concealment, it is actually a secondary function, and their resting colors already provide decent background matching without requiring any dramatic transformation. 34. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, and the entire country throws an enormous annual celebration complete with fireworks, barbecues, and patriotic merchandise to commemorate this date as the birthday of the nation. Congress did vote to approve the declaration on July 4th, but the actual physical signing ceremony, where most delegates put their names on the document, took place on August 2nd, 1776, nearly a month later. Several delegates signed even later than that, and at least one did not sign until 1781, 5 years after the supposed signing date being celebrated every summer. John Adams actually predicted the celebration would center around July 2nd, which was the date independence was formally voted on. And he was wrong about that too, so the whole timeline is essentially a patriotic mess. 35. You need to drink 8 glasses of water every single day to stay properly hydrated, and this number got repeated in health classes, printed on water bottles, and endorsed by wellness influencers with such unwavering confidence that it became one of the most universally accepted health rules in America. The 8 glasses recommendation was never based on any controlled scientific study, and researchers who investigated its origins traced it back to a 1945 government nutrition guideline that suggested people needed about 8 cups of water daily, but also clearly noted that most of that amount would come from food. That second part got completely dropped from the message somewhere along the way, and the naked number survived alone for decades, being treated as gospel nutritional science with no actual research behind it. 36. Space is completely silent because there is no medium for sound waves to travel through, and physics teachers across America delivered this fact with the kind of confident finality that made it feel like one of the universe's most absolute rules. The silence of space gets repeated so often that it became the tagline for an entire famous science fiction film franchise. NASA has actually recorded sound waves moving through the plasma and gas clouds of space, including a recording from the Perseus galaxy cluster where pressure waves moving through the surrounding gas produced a note 57 octaves below middle C. Sound in space does not travel the way it does through air, and humans could not hear it without assistance, but saying space is completely silent turns out to be a significant oversimplification of genuinely complex physics. 37. The human tongue can only detect 4 basic tastes, which are sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And this clean little 4-item list appeared in science textbooks for so long that it felt like one of those facts too simple and settled to ever need revisiting. Japanese scientist Kikunae Ikeda identified a 5th distinct taste called umami back in 1908 when he isolated the savory, satisfying flavor. Compound found in foods like meat, aged cheese, mushrooms, and soy sauce. But this discovery took nearly a century to gain full acceptance in Western science education. Researchers now believe there may be additional taste categories beyond these 5 being actively investigated, including fat taste and starchy taste, meaning the 4-taste model that got taught for generations was already outdated before most of the people who learned it were even born. 38. Walt Disney's body was cryogenically frozen after his death so that he could be revived by future technology. And this rumor spread so persistently through American pop culture that it became one of those things millions of people believe with surprising confidence despite there being absolutely no supporting evidence. Disney died on December 15, 1966, from lung cancer, and he was cremated just 2 days later on December 17 at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. There is a documented death certificate, a recorded cremation, and a real burial location that anyone can visit. The cryonics industry was barely even getting started in 1966, and the first known case of human cryonic preservation did not occur until January 1967, more than 2 weeks after Disney had already been cremated and laid to rest. 39. The school teaches you everything you need to know to succeed in real life, and this promise sat at the foundation of 12 or more years of mandatory education that millions of Americans sat through while learning to solve for X and memorize the dates of battles that ended centuries before they were born. The average American graduates high school without ever having received formal instruction on how to file taxes, understand a mortgage, read a credit score, negotiate a salary, manage debt, build an emergency fund, or navigate a basic legal contract. A 2022 survey found that the majority of Americans felt completely unprepared for basic financial decisions after leaving school. And the institution designed to prepare young people for adult life somehow forgot to include the most immediate and universal challenges every single adult faces starting the day after graduation. 39 lies, 12 years of school, and not a single class on how to do your taxes. Your teachers were not evil, your textbooks were not written by villains, but somewhere between Columbus supposedly discovering America and Walt Disney supposedly frozen in a vault, the truth just quietly got left out of the curriculum and nobody noticed for decades. Now, here is the question that will keep you up tonight. Out of everything you learned in school, how much of it was actually real? And how much was just a story someone decided sounded good enough to repeat forever? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because this comment section is about to get very interesting. If this video made you question everything you were ever taught, then hit that like button, subscribe to the Mythic Liar, because there are hundreds more lies exactly like these waiting for you, and share this with someone who still thinks Columbus was a hero. The next video is already right there on your screen, and trust us, it gets even worse.